Thank you for joining us this evening for a virtual gallery talk titled Replay, organized in conjunction with a solo exhibition of the same title by David Benjamin Smith, currently on view here at the Dowd Gallery on SUNY Cortland campus until February 24th. My name is Jaroslava Prihodova, and I'm the director of the Dowd Gallery. So thank you, David, for accepting our invitation and sharing your work with the community. Before we start, I have a short introduction. Born in Washington, D.C., David Benjamin Smith is a multidisciplinary artist and third-generation immigrant of Ashkenazi descent living in Brooklyn, New York. Among many recognitions, David was awarded a 2020 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Craft and Sculpture, and residencies in Apex Art, New Zealand, Franconia Sculpture Park, Minnesota, Marble House Project, Vermont, I Park, Connecticut, and many others. David's work has appeared in exhibitions at MoMA PS1, the International Center for Photography, Johannes Watt Gallery, Asia Song Society, and with solo shows at Gary Contemporary, Plant House, Spring Break Art Show, Hesley McKay Gallery in New York, and David B. Smith Gallery in Denver, Colorado. No relation. An exhibition titled Another World, the textile of David B. Smith, was on view in 2020-21 at Millersville University in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and SUNY Old Westbury in Long Island, New York. His work is in collections in many places. Just to mention one, Yale University, and his work has been discussed in publication such as Observer, Vice, Time Out, Washington Post, and New York Times. David holds a BFA for Oberlin College, Ohio, and MFA from Bard College. I also want to thank our sponsors and supporters. So this project is sponsored by Art and Art History Department in SUNY Cortland, the Art Exhibition Association, and the Campus and Artist Lecture Series grant. And of course, I want to thank you. I want to thank our students and visitors for continuous support. A few technical details before we start our program. Please keep your microphones muted for the duration of the program. We will have a Q&A section at the end of our talk. You can also enable a live closed caption feature on a Windows lower left corner. You can write questions or concerns, comments directed to our speaker into the chat window, or at the end of the program, I can make you a panelist and you can speak directly to our guest. Finally, the program is being recorded and will be added to our archive. And please do contact me if you're interested in obtaining an access to the captured footage this evening. So without further ado, thank you, David, for joining us, and we are delighted that you will share your insights about your work with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and share something about my background, and then also about my artistic practice and kind of the development of the language I'm working on now into where I've gotten with it to this current show. So I've written sort of an introduction that is mostly about my background, which I'll read, and then I'll go into some slides showing the progression of my work. Thank you, Yaroslava, for the introduction and for the invitation to present the exhibition Replay at the Dowd Gallery, and for planning exciting lectures, screenings, and a workshop. Thanks, Scott, for helping to install, move, pack, and store the work, and for taking such good care of the gallery. Thank you to my community and to the community at SUNY Cortland for inspiration, dialogue, collaboration, and being part of this work, and for inviting me to be part of yours. I'm going to tell the story of how I got to this place in my phototextile sculptural practice. There are many other aspects of my life integrated into this practice, but I'll focus on the specific language that I've been developing and growing with. To summarize this language, I take or find resonant images from personal or digital collective memory, alter the images in Photoshop, and have them output onto a variety of textiles. I then physically intervene into the textiles, cutting, collaging, sewing, stuffing, decorating, dyeing, painting, and otherwise transforming them through layered processes of space and time. Sometimes combining various pieces together, deconstructing them, reinterpreting them, and presenting them as immersive installations to address various themes, create speculative narratives, and provide opportunities to imagine what's possible. This practice is a place to explore my varied interests and invite dialogue and intersection around personal and collective experiences. Some of the central themes have been personal and collective memory, identity and community creation, world building, the psychology of creativity, comfort, discomfort, fear, and pleasure, bodily experiences in a new era of computerization, connection, isolation, loss, complexity, and opportunities for healing and flourishing. I'm a third generation immigrant of Ashkenazic Jewish descent. My grandparents and great-grandparents are Jews from Eastern Europe, and I was born in Washington, D.C. My mother worked in publishing and writing, and my father was a lawyer, art supporter, and curator. His father was a textile designer, and his mother made crafts and arts of all sorts. My mother's mother was a music teacher and also practiced home crafts, many of which she taught me growing up. As I grew up, I was drawn to visual arts, music, and architecture as a way of communicating things beyond words, with which I had trouble expressing myself. I thought about going to architecture school as I loved the way spaces can reflect and support those who inhabit them, but I had the privilege of getting a liberal arts degree to learn about many things without knowing exactly what I would do with that knowledge. I began as a psychology major, mostly curious to learn how and what people thought and how they made their dreams come true in the real world. But after taking my first art history class, I realized that by looking at art, I could understand this even more, and I became an art history major. In my last year, I took a studio art class in photography and felt a deep connection to the process of coming up with my own ideas and making them come true. I committed myself to becoming an artist. After college, I spent 8 years in New York working with artists in various ways, including photographing their work, helping in their studios, and working in art galleries. I also immersed myself in art, music, and culture, absorbing and talking to people of all sorts about what was interesting, new, and inspiring. During this time, I put together a portfolio of photographs and applied to graduate school. Since I had only taken 2 studio art classes to that point, I wanted to immerse myself in the training of making art. In graduate school, I tried any idea that came into my head. I had no intention of developing a product or brand. I wanted to dig deeper to see what was in my heart. I wanted to let go of the need to fulfill other people's expectations of who I was. I questioned the nature of reality, of mortality, of meaning, and it felt like I was dismantling myself, but eventually I found a baseline from which to begin building while continuing the practice of asking these questions. After grad school, I began teaching introductory art courses at SUNY Old Westbury. My job was to convince non-art majors that art was important, and in doing that work, I was able to understand why creative thinking matters to anyone in any field. And this led to the beginning of my own artistic production in a way that continues to resonate. Um, my ideas and energy come from my life, community, ancestral knowledge, and curiosity. I'll read you some of these sources of inspiration, and then I'll start to show you some images to illustrate the path of my photo textile sculptural language. Um, so these are just a sort of free form of inspirational sources for me. My dad's art collection, traveling to new places, studying photography, working at art galleries, going to museums, science fiction narratives, making crafts with my grandmother, video games and cartoons, experimental and independent movies, my family's practice with hand-making textiles, my grandfather's textile company, paying attention to what people wear, for example, hip-hop aesthetics of growing up in Washington, D.C., Judaic design and architecture in synagogues, art history classes and time studying Italian architecture in Rome, Dada situationist and experimental art and architecture, meditation and yoga, dialogue with my artistic community, natural structures and ecosystems, plant medicine, study of psychology and self-knowledge practices, philosophy of consciousness, inspiration from others, ways of living and organizing community in ways that resonate with my sense of truth. So I know that was a little hard to watch somebody read, but I just wanted to be articulate and download a lot of information to you. And if you have any questions on that or anything else, please feel free to put it in the chat or ask at the end. But I'm just going to show you sort of the trajectory of basically graduate school through now, just hitting on a few key exhibitions and sort of explain how the language develops. Okay, so this was an image. I went to graduate school for photography essentially, but I could really do anything I wanted in school. But I mostly was interested in photography, but really deconstructing what photography could be. I was really curious, like what it meant to make a photograph, how you could intervene into the process as the artist, um, how you could almost make photography a performance of some sort. So I would sometimes orchestrate my own body or others, friends, into photographs in various ways, impressing our bodies into the landscape. So this is me in kind of a depression of a removed palm tree, and it's I won't know the name of many of the works, but I remember this one is called "Filling the Void." Um, and then continuing with my experiments in photography right after graduate school, I was sort of really interested in, again, the body and film and imagery. So in this case, I took a whole roll of like slide film, color slide film, which many people may not know what that is anymore, but it's sort of like analog photography, and brought it into a darkened room, like a pitch black room, and shined different colors of light onto it, so that the light from the various gelled light would kind of be absorbed by the film. And then I cut it into slides and projected it with an old school slide projector in the order of the film, so you could see the way that my movements and the light were recorded by the film, often kind of looking like other things, maybe skies or sunsets or underwater imagery or whatever you could imagine. So that's kind of something that I've always been interested in, is that line between abstraction and imagery, like figure, like imagery that you can recognize. Um, and at the time, as I mentioned, I worked in art galleries, and I would collect sort of like neglected frames from the galleries and bring them to my studio. And to me, the frames sort of both represented like what like kind of like a blank slate for what an artwork could be, and also like a package for art. And I started thinking about art as not only the content, but the way you make it and the way you look at it. So I started to kind of play with the frames, maybe painting them so that they melded into the environment around me. Thinking about whether the frame was the art, or was the photo of the frame the art, or was the wall and the floor part of the art, and just thinking of all about, you know, what I wanted people to direct people to look at, and sort of these assumptions around how we look at art objects and how we derive meaning, beyond beyond the language of art. Um, and so this is another piece with the frames where I sort of turned the frames into architecture, and this piece was in Crown Heights, in a condominium that was kind of in a gentrifying neighborhood. So I was sort of thinking about how artists often move into neighborhoods, and sort of the invisible value of creativity that artists can create, and then over time kind of eventually build a certain type of value of real estate, of cultural cachet, and then and then so these frames are kind of like sort of metaphors for that kind of invisible creativity. And also I was interested in kind of using them to create temporary architecture, which is something I continue to do. I also would make sculptures out of frames and photograph them, and then present the photographs as art, um, talking about sort of the ability for a photograph to capture a moment that doesn't exist anymore, and kind of the essence of value, in the same way that these frames kind of have an essence of value in the sense that they once housed, some sort of valuable artwork, but sort of at the same time playing with them, and presenting them in ways that you're not supposed to, and questioning all the rules and all the politeness around art, and the correct way to do things, and kind of making that the content of the work. These are blank canvases which are all facing outward, and I created these walls in this very large industrial space in Brooklyn. So I kind of had this like secret room you could find like a small door to, and there were these lights that responded to sound. So once you were inside, you kind of had this kind of insider, like unexpected, um, feeling that you were in a kind of a sacred place where there was color and sort of a dimensionality to the wall. But from the outside, it was sort of a blank wall. Um, but again, using the blank canvases. And after that show, I had a lot of canvases to utilize. So even though this isn't really like anything I would show per se, it was an important step because I started to cut into the canvases, and just kind of, there have been artists before, obviously, that do this kind of work, but I was just more, interested in the idea of what kind of a mark could be made by cutting, and what it means to create a inside and an outside of an object by cutting it, while also having something that in a photograph appears to be flat. So something that's between flat and three-dimensional, and also sort of touching into the idea that canvas is a textile. So these, in a way, were sort of my first textile type works. Um, and on display in the hallway gallery at the Dowd Gallery, um, I have these works and a couple more on display, which are photographs of canvases I found in my studio hallway. And they were sitting there, and obviously the expectation of a canvas is to paint on it, but I was kind of having fun with just shifting expectations, kind of pivoting and improvising and doing the unexpected. And so I took photographs of the canvases in various configurations, making little sculptures. And um, then I had my first solo show at HQ Gallery in Williamsburg, and I presented a grid of these photographs, and then from each photograph, I made an image, or I made another artwork based on that image. So this, for example, is this picture on the left. I made another print of it, and instead of mounting it like I did with this, I folded it along all the lines of the sculpture, and allowed the paper to kind of be creased, be bent, reflect the light in a different way, become more object-like. Um, and this one is the image on the right. Um, I took the image into Photoshop and sort of cut and pasted it into a pattern, which is something I really enjoyed doing, like sort of being in coming of age and as a photographer in a time where digital tools were really starting to be used in photography, but not too much yet. So I would take the pictures and sort of tile them together intuitively and create these patterns as kind of like quizzical three-dimensional spaces where you're not sure if it's real or like illusionary. And I had it printed onto 3 canvases, which were actually the same size as these canvases, and then hung them in a corner, kind of playing with that relationship of two-dimensional and three-dimensional space again. And again, another example, taking the sculpture and taking the contour of that, and then cutting that shape out of plywood and rewrapping it with Belgian linen, which is a type of canvas used for painting. So going through all these layers of steps, sort of this piece and these last 2 pieces, I think really speak to my interest in process and into kind of a code-like process, like almost almost emulating a computer program type approach where there's like a list of actions that you perform, and then in that same way my work is always sort of evolving, always kind of open-ended, open source, and is designed to make people think about the process and how something came to be the way it is. um, so this is an example of one of my like digital collages, sort of like this one. Um, but I don't know if any of y'all can tell what it is, but this was a time when I started introducing kind of content from my own life and also collective memory into the work. So this is actually based on this. I don't know if you can see it. Obviously, if we were in a room together, we could talk, but I'll have to imagine you can kind of make out the eye, oh, actually, I can use my mouse. The eye, the sideburn, the mustache, the overalls. Um, and so I, this is Super Mario, one of everybody's, childhood memories, I guess. Not everyone, but specific group of people. And I was interested in taking something that was ubiquitously, understandable, and then sort of abstracting it just enough so that it was still familiar, yet kind of lost the specificness of what the original reference was. So it kind of conjures up kind of a generalized memory of the past, but without the specific, removing it from the specific narrative, which is a huge um, part of my work in the sense that I'm interested in taking, going back in memory and kind of reinvestigating the narratives for various purposes, but partly for the reason of being able to change one's identity as desired. Another is to navigate traumatic experiences, which can keep us in a looping of suffering and stuck feeling. But if we can go back and kind of move things around and see things from different perspectives, we can let go of that suffering and kind of move more into the present and into the future. So I took that image and had it woven into a jacquard blanket. Um, this narrative is pretty important when this transition occurred, because up to that point I had only been printing onto paper, and I had walked into a friend's house and she had a blanket like this but with her cat on it on her couch, and it was like really moving because she was like, this is my cat, but my cat passed away. I loved her, but now I have this blanket that reminds me of her, and I can like wrap myself in it. And there had been other times when I had thought about printing on this, printing on that, projecting. Like I was just so, trying everything, as I said, in graduate school. But at this particular moment, after sort of trying all different things, thinking about what photography could be, I thought, well, I'm gonna commit to using this technology for a year, and I'm gonna make a series of blankets out of Super Mario Brothers. So this is Super Mario. This is a digital collage based on the clouds in the sky um, in the game, turned sideways. And this is a collage or repetitive kind of cut and paste thing of I don't know what I think they're called Koopa. Um, I'm not sure what they're called, but they're basically these turtles that have shells, and but they also have wings, and they kind of jump around and fly. So I took a year to make, I'd say, 10 of those, and really started getting excited by having these photographs, or these remnants of memories of past, cultural memory that I could pick up and scrunch up and hang on the wall and fold, and I just wasn't really sure why I was doing it, but it felt very open-ended, like the beginning of something. And what I also really liked about it was these were created on a jacquard loom. A jacquard loom is a particular type of loom that was actually patented in 1801, and was actually one of the first, if not the first, computer, in the sense that you could feed it a program of punch cards, and it would weave by moving the treadles up and down in a non-repetitive way, but based on the program that you fed it, it could weave an image, which was quite like a revolutionary in, if you think about computing, um, as being able to write code and have a machine perform that code, then that code can be completely original and created new in any way the programmer wants. So what I really loved about it was that if you looked at the threads up close, it almost looked like pixels to me. It also looked like the grain of a black and white photograph or on a TV. And there was something really appealing about being able to touch and like physically interact with these pixels in the real world. Um, so I'm just jumping in here with a little bit of a non-related artwork, but also to make a note to y'all about, you know, me, because this is an artist talk and it's about me, but also I also wanted to say that I don't really believe that artists exist on their own. I think we're all, part of a network. We all inspire each other. It's all about dialogue. We're in dialogue with the past. We're with each other. We move ideas around, and there's really no such things as originality, I don't think. But this image was just kind of taken a little bit before that. And it was kind of about photography and how photography sort of freezes something in a particular moment. And it's like there's nothing after that. Um, but I wanted to kind of make fun of that moment and sort of make fun of the idea of like self-improvement and these sort of before and after pictures that I would see in advertisements on TV and billboards in New York, about, this is what you looked like before, and then we're going to show you a better version of you after. But I decided to leave out the after. Yeah, and I'll just pop in a couple more images of me throughout the talk. But um, then, so I continued working with this jacquard woven, because it's woven. You can see the fringes along the sides here. So this side is black and white, and then you have the colored threads on this side. So the black and white is the warp, and the colored is the weft. And the black and white, the colored is what makes the images, and the black and white kind of hides or reveals various colors. And it's actually 3 layers of depth. But I started to experiment with different types of photographic imagery I could put on the blankets. This is just a small sampling, but this is a kind of a doodle that a 5-year-old friend and me made on an iPhone, and it was something I treasured. So I thought, let me make that monumental and large and soft and colorful, and then do something with it. And then this ended up being incorporated into the work later. And this was a photograph of um, food that I ate in Japan, which I sort of cut and paste to make look even more abundant and kind of delicious, but also maybe a little overwhelming. Um, and then in some cases, I would manipulate the image so much in Photoshop that I would actually lose touch with what the original source was. And it literally just became this kind of like effervescent memory that was no longer a memory, but there was some sort of abstract bridge to that memory, which is really, speaks to a lot of how my work functions. Sometimes memory works, sometimes it leaves us, and that's the nature of memory. And that's something I'm really fascinated with, how memory works or doesn't. um, so this is the next show that I wanted to touch on was basically I sort of came up with a concept around this idea of, I was finished with the 8-bit blankets with the Mario thing. I mean, I continued to do it, but I wanted to do something a little more succinct around something more personal. And as I said, my dad was an art supporter, an art collector, and he also collected other random things. And when he passed away, I found this collection of vintage lunch boxes in his storage unit. And I kind of carried them with me. I thought they were kind of fun. I didn't really know what I thought. I would sell them one day for like hundreds of dollars and then be so cool. And, over time, I just started kind of seeing them more as sort of a bridge to my dad, and a kind of a potential metaphor for loss, for connection, um, for inheritance. And so what I did was I took photographs of these lunch boxes and made them into jacquard weavings, which I then manipulated. So if you look right here, you can see this little person with their arm up and this bear kind of holding hands. That's what's happening here. This is the bear's arm, and this is the person and their hair. You can't really see it too well because that's sometimes what I do is I'll intervene, and in this case, I sort of zoomed the camera while I was taking the picture, so it created this like time warp vibe. And then after I took the photos and made the work, I then sanded off the paint off of the lunch boxes and removed the lids and presented the lunchbox lids along with the artworks that were based on them. Um, in this case, even though you don't see the imagery, you can still make out what it's kind of about. Um, I would think. I mean, I can, but I think that's what's kind of interesting is how much information does it take to recognize something, and that's kind of a sliding scale based on so many things, both how well your organs of perception are doing, your cultural references, your and also what culture you're part of, and also what amount of detail is there. So in this case, this you can kind of see here, this is like the horse's eye on the side of the horse's nose and the horse's mouth. But what I did was I took this image here of this horse's face and had it woven onto a jacquard, removed the color, and then sort of flipped it like made like a mirror image, and then I folded and sewed the textile over and over again, repeating one side and the other, trying to kind of do something which was kind of paradoxical, which is improvise, but then copy the improvisational gesture to the other side to create this kind of face or mask. And you can see that piece here, part of a series of other masks and all of these other artworks created from images of the lunchboxes. And that kind of led naturally into sort of expanding that, and even some of those works, as you can see here, this hanging piece is right here on the ground. And this was a piece at Spring Break Art Show, a show called Extruded Daydream. So it was really going into that idea that of my interest in psychology around what is it like to look inside somebody else's mind, what does it mean to have a dream inspired by their dreams? What does it mean to play and create together between the two? So I invited people that were visiting the show to play with these soft sculptures and move them around, wear them, but actually not to sit on them. That was the only no, but and I had these wall pieces that were kind of like two-dimensional versions of these that were sort of fixed. They were like games that I played, but that were kind of not really on limits to be played with by the viewers. And while I was part of the show was that I had a Polaroid camera, which I would offer to take pictures of people who were visiting and give them the picture as a memento of their time and of our time together. And then I would take a picture of their picture so I could have a memory too. So these are, people would kind of play, they would have different ideas, they would think about what kind of image they would want to make and then get to take it home. And I still really enjoy looking at these, and it brings me right back to that moment when the picture was taken, and all that feeling of openness and silliness and kind of joy that we shared. Also in that show, I invited a number of performers to devise performances based within the exhibition, and this is Tanya Marquardt, who is a theater maker, writer, and performer. And they were sort of improvising with the sculptures, and this person came and said, I want to play too. So Tanya and she improvised, played, jumped, even though I actually didn't want them to jump or step on the sculptures, they did. And that was part of the work. I didn't, of course, stop it or anything, but it was just kind of this moment of like holding on to value, holding on to assumptions, not really knowing what was happening. But that was why I wanted to invite these people, because I wanted to see what would happen. Um, I don't know if you can see, but the this was Jessica Cook, who's someone I've collaborated with many times on the right, who's a movement artist, and she invited another dancer and musician to create a sort of a narrative around like an underwater world where the creatures were kind of enacted into this slow, flowing like landscape. That's an example of one of the sculptures. And then I made a tiny sculpture kind of based on this one. And then again, this is another portrait, not a self-portrait, but kind of me immersed in my own art, like kind of riffing on the idea of like an artist being subsumed by their own art, like exuding their own art. And I just, in this moment, I wanted to just take a moment to mention that, or to observe that when people look at artworks, they often not only look at the work, but they think about who made it and what's the story behind it. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. So I wanted to share this just kind of as another note in that song that we're creating tonight. Um, Similarly, there's me where I got the opportunity to make sort of a monumental sculpture, and I wanted to contrast that with this tiny one. But it was a large sculpture at Franconia Sculpture Park in Minnesota, and I created these sort of large uh, like bodies, which I called them, but made out of billboards that I created from photographs related to the area surrounding Franconia and Minnesota. For example, this one that I'm stuffing here is a picture of lichens that I took on a nature walk nearby. And as you can see, I hand sewed all of the large sculptures and then stuffed them with recycling that I found in the area, mostly a recycling center. So people were bringing their recycling in, and I was just taking it out to stuff the sculpture. And this is the completed piece called Intimate Strangers. Um, you can even go inside it, and there's the lichen photograph billboard. This one's based on some wooden sculptures that I helped some families create on one of the family sculpture days at the park. And then this is a photograph, which is one of the billboards, and it was based on the refrigerator in the residency had photographs of all the residents and the people that work there, like kind of like kid pictures, which I combined with a photo of a bonfire that I took while we were there, and that's this one here. Um, and then I had the opportunity to make another sculpture that was kind of an evolution of that at Socrates Sculpture Park in Queens. And these were some of the shapes I was playing with for the sculpture, which was going to be basically sort of like this, but like instead of being so droopy, it was going to have more of an internal structure. So at Socrates, they have this billboard above the entrance where artists design billboards. And fortunately for me, I was able to utilize these billboards in the work because they weren't really like they didn't really have any plan for archiving them, and they were sort of falling apart over time. So I took my favorite sculpture, and that was where I wanted to put it. Well, that was the area that we decided would go. And I started to build it from these modular wooden shapes. And I wrapped the wooden shapes in foam and then upholstered that with the billboards, with like fragments of the billboards. And then also on the right, you have kind of another configuration that was considered during the process, which is more of a wooden armature with soft billboard pillows kind of intertwined throughout it. And this was called Digital Skin, and was kind of started to build kind of a science fiction narrative for the first time of like a world where animals and plants and technology were merging and creating strange offspring and unfamiliar ways of communicating, possibly through imagery on their skin. Um, and I really loved this project because the creation of the work was in public while we were making the pieces. They had a space where people could talk to you, and then you're installing it and people are talking to you, and then the piece is up and you get to see how people interact. And I just really took to public sculpture and just loved how this was in a public park where people would just come for school trips or picnics or walk their dog, but get to have art kind of surprise them and be part of their day. Um, and in this moment, I kind of just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how, again, like artists are not working alone, and in this case, this all of our works came together to create this larger experience. This this piece in the foreground is by Gordon Hall. The piece here is by Tali Karen and Alex Strada. There's a piece right here, which you can't see, by Moeen Shashay. This right here is by Rit Premnath. This is by Tanda Francis. And this is by Devra Friedlander. You can see it to scale here. And after that, I wanted to make sort of like small baby versions kind of that, like that are soft and kind of cozy. But I wanted to continue the narrative of like of a future world where, beings you know, were kind of existing sort of extrapolations or speculations of where we might be going technologically. And in this case, I just kind of made up the fact that this here on the left was sort of like this doorway to another world or something. And then these things are like beings that are like kind of in this transitional space, just whether they're hanging out, maybe they're being studied, maybe they're resting, they're absorbing nutrients. I don't really know, but it was kind of a breakthrough in the sense that I created kind of a whole series that followed a similar set of rules. So they were a similar scale, they were using similar materials, um, similar kind of constraints, um, and then that allowed me to kind of talk more about diversity, about identity, about how there are so many infinite, ways to be and to be creative and to present oneself and to see the world. Um, so I wanted to continue, as you can tell, the narrative here is that I put things on fabric and then I continued to kind of add new ways to manipulate the fabric or to add to the fabric or change it, and in this case I started doing embroidery. So I took made a digital collage. This is an exhibition at Halsey McKay in East Hampton called Soft Bodies. And it was all flat works that were kind of presented almost like paintings. And they were sort of like, instead of making sculptures, I was kind of more interested in like a window into this imaginary other world. Um, so I was kind of imagining these kind of how like being able to like beings that were translucent, you could see the insides and outsides of them. And it's actually, this being is this figure, human figure, is sort of cut and paste into one of my previous installations. And then I started collecting various yarns and threads and just teaching myself how to embroider and sort of draw and color and add texture. This is the back, the back of the image, and this is the front. And this is a close-up. So it's again, it's a jacquard weaving, but I found that you could also not only make a blanket at this place, but you could also make like a photo tapestry, which is essentially just a smaller blanket with smaller threads and tighter weave, but it has more resolution. So I would create these digital collages and then embroider into them. This is actually a highly photoshopped self-portrait, which I then added sort of a grid, colorful grid to. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but this is when Mark Zuckerberg was testifying in front of Congress for the first time, and everybody was saying, "Oh, he looks so strange. Does he have any emotions?" And I thought, "Is he an alien?" And I thought, well, let me see what it would look like if we imagine he was some kind of alien, some kind of cyborg or something, because that's what everybody was thinking. And well, not everyone, but that's what I was thinking. And so some company had developed this technology that supposedly could read your emotions based on the way your face moved. And it must have been a Spanish company. So it was like giving the percentages of what emotions Mark was experiencing kind of like in real time. So I screenshot that on YouTube and then created a 3D, I mean, a digital like tapestry and then embroidered into it. I'd like to use metallic threads. Sometimes I use beading, iridescent threads. I like to try all different things to see what kind of effects. And in this case, this is actually a screenshot from a simulation video game. It's a bus driving simulator, and that's kind of another thing I'm interested in is like simulation theory or whatever, and like glitches in the simulation. And in this case, this character, they walked into the bus, and the bus driver, um, you couldn't, he sort of blocked the door, and he wouldn't go in and he wouldn't go out. So I thought, well, this is my moment to take a picture, because it's this character who has this kind of like pleasant look on their face, but is also completely locking up the entire game. Um, and I just thought, well, that's an interesting moment, because it's a moment of potential. It's a moment of what's going to happen next, and like also talking about where we as a society with culture, with technology, are we about to take a step forward? Are we going to take a step backward? Are we going to crash? And then just presenting this image and without any context, I think people can kind of create their own narratives. And this is just an installation view of that show. So as you can tell, sometimes my work is extremely maximal, and other times it's very minimal in this case. And I think this is the last one I was going to show. This image here is actually a proposal for the Spring Break Arts Show. I wanted to continue the narrative building, and so I came up with this idea of what I called cave dwellers, and the idea being that this was going to be kind of a representation of like some kind of futuristic cave with beings on the wall and a figure with no head, and then maps on the wall and a spider, and sort of bringing together a number of my different ways I've been developing into one narrative. And this is how it ended up turning out. I added the green grid at the last minute, kind of to like inspired by like Star Trek's holodeck, which I just really love, the idea of a room where you can just turn it into whatever you want. And so these were the cave dwellers. Like you kind of have the protagonist and their various friends or beings around them, and then these, which I call, this one here is the cloud map, and this is a cave map. And there's kind of a parallel narrative called the cloud minders, that where the cave dwellers live below the surface of the planet, kind of getting resources for the cloud miners, and the cloud miners live high above and kind of float and live like an easy life where they just have where they're kind of living in the technological cloud. I just wanted to show you a little of how I made that. So I'm very like DIY. I don't have a background in sewing. I've taken a few, I just look at YouTube. I just use my intuition, and honestly never haven't really taken a class in any kind of textiles, but I just like to just imagine things and try things. And I took this aluminum wire, wrapped it in tape, and I know it's kind of, you're probably cringing because it's probably an easier way to do it, but polyester, and just upholstered it with these. Actually, these are dye sublimation prints on fleece, on polyester fleece, of sort of sort of like abstractions of Bugs Bunny cartoons. I don't know if you can see that, but and then I made the pedestals that kind of like sort of emulate like rocks, but also like 8-bit kind of like stone pedestals and sort of candy slash pastel colors. And this guy could be, you could bend the limbs however you wanted. You can see Yosemite Sam's face here and Bugs Bunny's face here. And this was on the wall. And this is what I called the, yeah, this was kind of like, this was like a sort of a progression on those, beings from another world. Um, this was this was actually kind of a whole story, which I won't go into, but sometimes I'll make a work in one context and then transform it into another context and sort of make it fit into a narrative. So this was basically abstract, small abstract textile work, which I photographed, then had that blown up into a large size, and then went in and reworked with embroidery and paint. And to me, it looked like kind of like a cross section of a map with little like shaft ways down into the earth. Um, Maybe with the center being the home base that I'm showing here. And you can see the wall, the piece on the wall, and the spider. And then this was the cloud minders, um, which was kind of like this ethereal, like sort of light colored room, um, which also displayed narratives around the speculative sort of science fiction narrative I was creating. This piece, which is in the replay show at the Dowd Gallery, is called Psychic Amnesia, and it sort of represents anything, but also I had in mind that maybe this was a mother and she lived in the cave dweller realm, and she somehow snuck her son up to the cloud minder realm, and he didn't know that he came from down here, but she knew that he was going to be like king. And then it's like this whole like, it's just kind of a fun to make up stories and see what other kind of other stories people can come up with by looking at it, what they think of. And this is hand embroidered, stuffed, painted, um, different different textiles, different embroider. I mean, different jacquard tapestries, both the tighter weave on the faces and the looser weave on this part, and then there's like stuffing and sort of like three-dimensional. And the same with this. This is called Cloud Walker. And just to finish up, I sort of during the pandemic, I took a break from pursuing these narratives, these science fiction narratives. This was my show at David B. Smith Gallery in Denver, and it was less about presenting a story, imaginary story, and more about making the creative process the central theme of the work. The main reason I wanted to do that was because I sort of noticed that, or I felt there was maybe a need for people to feel empowered to be creative, to play, to imagine, to try new things. And so I presented these pairs of works. This is a pair, this is a pair, this is a pair. And each of these pairs are made with the same recipe or the same set of rules. And the idea being that when you go and look at them, you start to ask yourself, well, how was this made? What was the process behind this? What was the thinking? What were the steps? And that's kind of what I'm bringing into replay at the Dowd Gallery. I, it's all about playing, imagining how things are, how things could be, um, seeing what's possible, what isn't, what your inner desires are, checking in with your somatic experience, how you want to move, how you want to look at things, what kind of stories you want to tell. And I kind of just wanted to sort of not step aside, but I wanted to make space for people to imagine and dream and not to necessarily follow my dream. Um, and this piece is on the opposite wall of this in the Dowd Gallery, and it's called Ways of Being. And it's essentially works that I made. You might see some of them that are familiar from my talk from 2015 or so till now. And it represents just all the different ways there are to be in the world, um, the different ways of seeing, of thinking, of existing, and really, to me, points at much how much more interesting of a world it is when there are all different types of people and beings, and much we can how much exciting creativity we can generate in dialogue with each other across and throughout this difference, and making the effort to understand where each other are coming from and to celebrate that difference is really the at the heart of this exhibition. So I should probably not share the screen for Q&A, but I guess I could pop it back up if somebody wants to see something. But yeah.
Well, thank you, David, for amazing talk and very a comprehensive explanation of your practice and your background and experiences with your education. That answered a slew of questions that I had prepared. So I will open the floor for our audience. So please raise your hand or write your question into a chat window, and we'll address the questions as they appear. And in the meanwhile, as I mentioned, as I mentioned to you directly before, we had so many visitors who are emerging from this experience of COVID and very eager to interact with the artwork, and being engaged is a new experience or re-experience for some people after COVID. So was this, you talked about it at the end of your talk, but was this intentional or is it directly related to the post-COVID situation that we are experiencing now?
Um, yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think I often, as an artist, try to ask myself, like, what is going on in the world now that that's sort of central and I'd like to address. So I sort of serve as a kind of a like antenna for sort of what I think might be interesting, what people might be interested in, what might be useful, and what I would might want to say about it. And what I was really noticing was during the pandemic, during lockdown, people really lost touch with going out of their homes, being in spaces with other people, playing. I mean, if you just think of the word play and you sort of, there's so many assumptions around play. We think of it as it's for kids, it's something you do for fun, but actually playing is more just the way we interact, the way we improvise together, the way we talk and come up with ideas and possibilities and run through ideas with each other. And I just thought, well, now that we can get out there and that we're all quite a bit safer, why not make that kind of the subject of the show? Is so replay kind of brings up various meanings from, returning to play to um, uh, like, reconnecting with play, reconnecting with each other, and then also, kind of the idea of like replaying old things, like older things, and reinterpreting them. So kind of remembering how to play. So I mean, and that's something I wanted to do. Like I wanted to do all those things. So I thought, well, if I want to do that, I should make a show where I can do that and where I can invite other people to do that. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Have one question here. Uh, uh, David, would you like to read it? It,
Uh, I'm
it's a
trying to,
long.
yeah, I'm trying to, it popped up, but then
It,
it,
it's
but it-
from Wiley. Um,
oh yeah. Should I read it the whole thing, or do you want to
yeah, I
read it?
think it would be best.
Okay. Hold on, let me just get my chat window set up here. Okay. So thank you so much for your question. I don't know if I should, yeah, I'll say your first name, Wiley. Thank you so much, David. Your work. Well, let me skip to, okay. As I listen to your talk and I'm thinking about the show, it makes me think about the possibilities of play as a kind of critical tactic. Thinking about Johann Huizinga, for instance, and the idea of play and the spaces of play as the only true space humans have that gets close to freedom. Do you think about these ideas in your work in terms of your work operating as a kind of vehicle to access these spaces, whether they be physical spaces or mental, for example, dispositions that allow us to operate freely without boundaries or rules? From the resident art historian, hence the length, LOL. I love that. Thank you. I really appreciate that question, and um, I was kind of made aware of I'm not sure how to pronounce Huizinga's book Homo Ludens recently, and I'm kind of like, I would say devouring it, but I'm more just starting it, and it's really exciting. Yeah, it's like I think you really put your finger on what it is that I'm talking about, and the word freedom really, it's a word that is kind of utilized a lot without really meaning anything, and I think by bringing play into the conversation around freedom, it starts to become much more specific about the idea of exploring all the possibilities of thinking, playfully and creatively and improvisationally with your body and your mind about what you want and what could be. Because if you don't have access to that facility, then it's kind of hard to even know what you want at that point, and you're more subject to other people's expectations of you. So really, I'm really glad you asked that, because it's really at the heart of what I want from my work, and what I want for people to experience it. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on it?
You can unmute yourself, Wiley.
Okay.
There you go.
Yaroslav just pulled me into the discussion. I teach art history in the department, so
Yeah.
were you asking me or Yaroslava?
Well, I guess I was asking you, but you know,
Yeah,
because you said it makes
I'm
you think of it. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the I was really struck by my understanding of the role that these spaces of play in terms of, Johann Huizinga, right? The Dutch historian, philosopher. He wrote in that book, Homo Ludens, that there's only one true context for which as humans being utterly without convention, boundary, when our thinking is the most free, when our behavior is the most free, without thought or recourse. And that these, that it's necessary for humans to have these, whether they're mental or physical spaces that are designed, and I think he uses the example of being on a boat, a sailboat or any type of boat, because you're sort of outside of the normal constraints of society's conventions and norms and expectations, where you can actually just be free. And so he kind of, the notion is that if you can create these designated spaces, these are spaces where you're sort of inviting people in. And for example, the room um, to the left side in the gallery, I every time I'm in the gallery space, I see groups of students or people just kind of obviously sitting there, kind of realizing, okay, this is a space where something can happen, laughing, kind of talking freely. And I've witnessed that happening, and it really struck me as a sort of, that it's really interesting. I really like it.
Oh, that's so great to hear, since I can't be there, but also just your way of explaining it. And yeah, I mean, I really agree. I mean, I think that um, children are often, given the space to play. It's sort of expected of them, and uh, encouraged, and that's sort of how they make sense of the world, and how they kind of come to develop their minds and their problem solving abilities and their ability to see things from different angles. And I think there's kind of a thing that happens where later in life, we you know we're not there's a cultural expectation that adults don't get to do that. We have to always be doing things based on what an objective we're trying to achieve, or there are these fleeting moments, but often those moments are capitalized upon through consumption of products or
Mm.
consumable experiences. But this idea of a freedom of playing and creating, it's not, to me, I almost see it as a dream state, or like a disassociated state where you cease to care about your own ego. You cease to care about your own success in the world, and you're sort of like, and as Huizinga says, there's this ability to kind of like compartmentalize play into this separate kind of like almost like dream state. And that's why that piece that you're talking about with the lights and the pillows on the floor is called Collective Dream. And I kind of thought, if they have this kind of dim light, maybe people could kind of imagine they're in a dream. and and how
Mhm.
do you act when you're in a dream versus when you're not, when you're awake, and kind of like, it would be, I think people can be kind of scared of this because they think, well, with them, when will it end, but it's more about like having the self-awareness to know when you want to be in the state and when you don't. you know
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, and something you just said also, it certainly within the context of commodity capitalism, later phase advanced capitalism, play becomes, a frivolity, like because it doesn't, within the context of consumer capitalism, doesn't have a place for to be, it's not productivity. So it's seen as excess. Whereas, I think within the context of Huizinga's framework of understanding, it's actually, it's a generator of creativity, which ultimately, I mean, leads to the creation of worlds, the creation of any kind of form, the creation of new possibilities. And I don't think that our society puts anywhere near enough emphasis on the vital role that play serves in that regard. But, not to mention chilling people out and creating joy, which, depending how you look at life, could be seen as one of the goals. So,
No, that's great. That's really, yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel like this show kind of like popped into my mind. Like, why aren't more people doing work about the idea of playing? Because it seems like there's so much to learn. Like, how does it work? Like, what's the psychology? Like, yeah, how does it chill people out? Like, like how does identity play into it? And like what what is possible with playing, and like integrating it more systematically into various structures, social structures, for example. um it's always just kind of this afterthought, like, well, now we're going to do recess, so that's your playtime. And but like, actually, we're playing all the time, but we don't call it play. And so I think there's a lot of language and concepts around play that I'm really excited to like delve into, learning more about, and having more conversations, um,
mhm, agree.
around. Yeah.
On
So,
that note, I just wanted to mention that we have a talk scheduled directly related to this subject by Katarzyna Zimna from Lodz University in Poland, who wrote a book called Time to Play, Action and Interaction in Contemporary Art. So we are excited to have another virtual presentation in a later February. So please join us for that if you are interested in specifically the subject of play, which I think is, as you both mentioned, under investigated or underrepresented in today's contemporary scene. So um, um, we have a few comments. David, you've been
oh,
acknowledged, and people loved seeing more of your work and hearing your thinking around your creative practice. So again, thank you. And if we don't have another questions, I think we can consider this program concluded. I don't want to take a lot of your time. You've been very generous, and thank you for that. And I would like our visitors to visit the gallery in person and interact with 4 of the installation pieces that are inviting our visitors to play. And also invite them for future programs. The gallery will be participating in a First Friday. This Friday, we are open until 8 o'clock. And along with that project or this gallery walk, community gallery walk, I will be posting our virtual 3D virtual tour on our website and a few installation images. And we have a slew of projects scheduled, so please visit our website or our social media for further details. And we have more information about David's practice on our website and other participants who will contribute to this program. So thank you again for every day, specifically David, for all your time and dedication to this project and to this exhibition, and all our visitors who join us for this talk. So thank you again. And I do want to emphasize that David will be on campus on Monday, February 13, for in-person walkthrough through the exhibition, and he will conduct artist workshop right after. So please visit our website for more information, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you, Wiley, for chiming in.
Yep, thank you.
And we hope to see you soon.
Yes,
Thank
David,
you
I
so
look
much.
forward to meeting you when you come to campus and we can talk more.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be great to meet you. And yeah, and anyone wants to join the workshop, and it'd be great to or the walkthrough. And thank you all for attending, and Yaroslava for hosting this tonight.
Yeah, it was a great talk.
Oh, thank you. So glad you
Thank you.
thought so. Thank you. Have a good night.